Sometimes, we may think that it's easy to survive without our loved ones by our side. After being caught in a compromising situation with her mother's boyfriend, a teenager, Heidi is forced to abscond and fend on her own. Let's see how Heidi survives living alone in a strange city. Will it be a bed of roses, or will she have difficulty surviving till the end? In the opening scene of Some Assault, Adam and Heidi, a 16-year-old girl from Canberra, drive to the bar. Adam is her mom's boyfriend. On getting in, she sees her mom, Nicole. Immediately she walks up to her and reminds her that it's a school night, which means she's supposed to be at home. Nicole instructs her to go wait for her in the car while she gets her bag. Heidi enters the car, with her mom coming after her. She gets into the back seat without even talking to Adam, while her mom enters the driver's side, and then turns to kiss Adam. The next morning, Nicole is dressed for work, while Heidi is still preparing. When she's done, she heads out. Heidi makes Adam a cup of coffee, then sits down on the bed with him while he sips it. Adam is bare-chested, and on seeing the tattoo on his chest, Heidi asks if it hurt him, and he tells her it did when it was engraved. Weirdly, Heidi wants to feel it, but Adam tells her it's just like bare skin. Still, she wants to touch it. While touching the tattoo, Heidi leans in and kisses Adam. Adam doesn't resist, even though Heidi is his girlfriend's daughter, but even draws her in and continues to kiss her. Unfortunately, in their state of making out, Nicole comes in and catches them red-handed. Nicole is shocked and can't believe her eyes. Adam hurriedly pushes Heidi away, and Nicole leaves the room in tears. Heidi hurriedly follows her mom out of the room, trying to explain, but she pushes her away. Adam comes out and tries to defend himself that they were doing nothing. But Nicole can't be fooled, because she caught them red-handed. Heartbroken, Nicole looks at Heidi in disgust, pushes her, and walks out angrily, leaving Heidi in tears. Heidi leaves home after realizing what she has done to her mom. She boards a bus to Jindabyne, a tourist community. After the solemn journey, she finally arrives in Jindabyne and goes to a phone booth to make a call. She calls Eddie, a guy she met in Canberra, but even after explaining herself to him and reminding him that he gave her his card, he can't remember her, and he tells her not to call him again and hangs up. Her impulsive mistake has cost her her only family, and now she's on a journey with no direction. Stranded, Heidi walks into a bar, and on meeting a group of boys there, she soon starts to drink and dance with them, while a young man admires her from a corner. From the bar, Heidi follows one of the boys, Sean, to the house and ends up bedding him just for somewhere to sleep. The next morning, Sean wakes all of them up. Heidi notices Sean is dressed up, and to her surprise, he's going back to Sydney. Unfortunately, she can't go with him like she wants to, because he has a girlfriend. He just thought of her as a one-night stand. She's back to square one, or even zero. Later that day, Heidi goes to a store to look for a job, because she knows the little money she has won't keep her going. Unfortunately, there's no vacancy, even as Heidi tries to flirt with him to gain favor. Heidi sits outside and notices a man in a car staring at her. She sees this as an opportunity, but unfortunately, a lady enters the car before she reaches the man. In the next scene, Heidi is in a bar, and Joe, the young man who was admiring her at the bar the first day she arrived, approaches her. Joe offers to buy her a drink, and strikes up a conversation from there. Heidi leaves Joe to go find something of hers, making Joe wonder if it was given to her by her boyfriend. She clarifies that she doesn't have a boyfriend, but he asks about the guy he saw her dancing with at the party, Sean. Heidi explains that Sean is not someone she'd go out with. They continue their conversation, and talk about doing bad things. As for Joe, the worst thing he has done is run over a but she reveals that she kissed her mother's boyfriend. Well, two different people, sinning differently. But not to make her feel bad, Joe assures her that running over a dog is worse than kissing her mom's boyfriend. Before Joe leaves, he offers to drop her off anywhere, but she declines the offer, so he leaves. However, it seems as if the reality of her hopeless situation dawns on her. She has a change of heart. Heidi quickly goes outside and stops Joe's car. She joins him, saying that she wants to go with him, but he doesn't want her to follow him, because he resides outside of town. However, Heidi doesn't mind. Instead of going to his house, Joe takes Heidi to a motel. She likes the place, and while inside, she undresses. But Joe looks away, facing the TV. He doesn't seem interested in Heidi's talk about their meeting not being fate, so he tells her to sleep, since she's tired. The next morning, Joe is already late for work, so he hurriedly gets ready and leaves Heidi, without even suggesting further contact. On arriving at the farm, he lies to his dad that he slept over at Stuart's, his friend's house. Leaving the motel room, Heidi sees a tray of breakfast at someone else's doorstep and starts to eat it. Irene, the woman who runs the motel, sees her and advises her to get something to eat from town, since she didn't order breakfast. Probably noticing the look of, "I don't have money," on Heidi's face, Irene offers to give her tea. While they're talking, Irene brings up Joe. Heidi discovers many girls think Joe is nice, just like her. Seeing that she and Irene have formed a sort of friendship, she asks her casually if she can work with her at the motel, but Irene refuses, saying she's fine working alone. Heidi wants to reserve the room she stayed the night in. because she's not sure of any other accommodation. So she begs Irene if she can pay in a couple of days, but Irene agrees for just 1 day. After the agreement with Irene, Heidi calls Joe through his parents' farm where he works, but she's not able to reach him. At Joe's parents' farm, his mom shows him to Richard, an old friend of theirs. Richard has a problem with his tractor, so she wants Joe to help him fix it. When Joe is about to leave, his mom informs him that a girl named Heidi called for him, and she said it was important. However, Joe is not interested in what his mom is saying. He just continues walking off. Heidi knows that if she doesn't get a job, there's no way she'll be able to survive. So she goes to a store to ask if there's a vacancy, and fortunately for her, the reply is positive. The lady, Bianca, then gives her Pete's number to call to get more information about the job. Before Heidi calls Pete, she does a little rehearsal for the interview. Afterward, she goes to the mirror and also does a sexy conversation. This seems to be for when she later meets Joe again. At Joe's house, his mom comes out on hearing the sound of the phone ringing. She tells Joe to inform Heidi not to call late at night. Irene, knowing that Heidi doesn't have money to keep on paying for the motel room, brings her to stay at her son's flat and reminds her that she'll still have to pay rent. She asks Heidi about her mom, but she lies to her that her mom is deceased. After showing her all the necessary things, Irene drops the house key for Heidi and heads out, while Heidi settles down to unpack her small bag. At Richard's father's place, he's trying to gather the things he'll sell and the ones he won't, while Joe and Stuart help out in whatever ways they can. Richard lived in France for 10 years, and since Joe has been to France, they engage in a discussion that they can both relate to. Heidi goes back to the convenience store, where she is now hired to work. After giving Heidi orders and telling her how everything functions at the store, Bianca, her co-worker, asks her reason for moving, since she doesn't have any relatives living there. She tells her a little story about Eddie, the guy that claimed not to remember her when she called him. While Heidi is finishing attending to a customer, Joe walks into the store. On seeing Heidi, he doesn't act like they've met, nor strike up a conversation with her. He just makes his purchase and casually asks Bianca the time they shut. He secretly glances at Heidi and even implores them not to work too hard. Heidi goes out, then he calls her, and from there, they go to a bar to have drinks. While they're talking, Heidi starts to run her fingers over Joe's hands, but he immediately pulls his hand back and offers to pour her more drink. After taking several shots, Joe follows Heidi to her new flat. Joe removes his jacket, and it's like he has been restraining himself, but couldn't any longer, so he kisses Heidi. They later have sex. The next morning, things have eased out between them. Heidi sits on Joe's lap, running her hands through the hair on his chest, while he just lays down, enjoying the feeling. This time, he's not hurrying to leave early for work. Heidi later leaves for a bar. After observing some boys playing snooker for a while, she sees a piano and goes over to play a little. While working with Stuart on the farm, Joe gets into his car, and Stuart follows him, asking him where he has been sleeping, since he hasn't been at his place. He refuses to reveal where he has been sleeping, and even mentions that it is not his business. Stuart suspects he's been seeing an Italian girl that they both know. Joe denies it, and reveals he wouldn't know this particular girl he's seeing. When Heidi resumes work, Bianca hands her a lapel pin bearing her name. While she is cleaning, she looks at herself in the mirror and admires the lapel pin with her name. She is happy with herself for at least getting a job. After work that day, they both come out after locking up. Bianca gets into her mom's car, and her mom offers Heidi a lift. Initially, she declines, but after a little persuasion from Bianca, Heidi gets into the car. When Bianca's mom realizes that Irene gave her the flat her son was using, Bianca reveals that Irene's son is in jail. She gets out in front of the house, but Joe is already waiting outside in his car for her. Inside, Joe reveals he likes being with her. Then she reaches out for his hand, because she likes holding his hands, but Joe is not a hand holder. Since Joe does not like to hold hands, Heidi is confused about what he likes doing. Joe proudly claims he likes to touch her for starters, before doing more. Heidi is already in bed, and Joe brings the dinner he ordered. After eating, they make out. Later at night, Heidi and Joe take a romantic walk, and they meet Stuart and some of his other friends in a car. Joe does the introductions. Unfortunately, they make fun of her because of where she works. Joe isn't comfortable with the way his friends are talking about Heidi, so they leave. After leaving his friends, Heidi and Joe go to a restaurant to eat. Out of the blue, Heidi asks Joe if he loves her. This comes as a very big shock to Joe. He is confused and reminds her they only just met, but Heidi thinks it's enough time for him to know if he loves her or not. She believes he's scared to say anything, but he claims not to be scared, but just hates being interrogated. Since Joe refuses to make any commitment to her, Heidi goes ahead to swallow a small bowl of chili sauce. Joe tells her to spit it out, but when she refuses to do so, he drags her to the restroom for her to spit out everything she swallowed. After throwing up, he takes her back to the motel. After dropping Heidi off at the motel, Joe returns to the party to have fun with his friends. While at the table, his friends still make fun of him being with a girl that works at the servo. They have a little argument about the issue, with Joe defending her. Not being able to take it anymore, Joe leaves the place. Still, Stuart won't leave him be. He follows him outside, and the argument escalates, resulting in a fight. From the party, Joe goes over to Richard's house. Richard is supposed to travel back after 1 week and come back later for the house auctioning. Over drinks at Richard's house, Joe informs Richard that he and Stuart got into a fight. Richard is interested in knowing the reason for the fight, and then Joe tells him it's about Heidi. He refers to her as a friend that he sleeps with, but she's not a close friend. She's just a friend that is there for the moment. Like when one walks through a perfume and it lingers for a while. Joe is feeling messed up. Richard offers to drive Joe home because he thinks he is too drunk to drive himself, but he refuses the offer. Then Joe kisses Richard, but he refuses to take advantage of Joe because he knows he's not in his right state of mind. Instead, he believes he doesn't know what he wants, and Joe walks inside to sleep. The next morning, Joe feels a little better and drives himself back home. On getting inside, he meets his father. He breaks down into tears, revealing that he's drunk. But his father is not bothered one bit. He even knows he's drunk. His father ignores all the emotional distress and leaves angrily. Back at Heidi's place, she feels lonely and forgotten, because Joe hasn't spoken to her since the incident at the restaurant. She even goes to Irene to find out if she may have received any messages for her, but there's none. Bianca brings Heidi to her house, and she meets her family members. She even takes Heidi to where the animals are, and she admires the white horse so much. On getting back to the house, Heidi meets Bianca's father, and it happens to be the same man she tried to flirt with in the first store she went to when she first arrived and was looking for a job. Knowing what she did, she doesn't feel comfortable when she sees him, so she informs them she'd like to go, claiming she feels tired. However, Bianca's dad, Roy, offers to give her a ride home, and also get squash for his family on his way back. While in the car alone with Roy, he tries to engage her in a conversation. Heidi notices that Roy turned into a road that is not the normal route, and he claims he wants to show her something. Roy stops the car and reveals why he has taken her on the ride. He believes Heidi would be a bad influence on his daughter because of the first encounter he had with her, so he warns her not to see his daughter outside work. His daughter has her life in front of her, and he doesn't want anything to mess it up. As Roy speaks, Heidi is cleaning the tears running down her eyes. When Heidi gets to work the next day, she notices that Bianca isn't her normal cheerful self. She is now cold and distant toward her. Heidi is bothered by her new attitude, so she asks her what the problem is. Bianca confesses to her that her dad told her everything. At this point, Heidi gets angry. She starts to drag Bianca by the arm to forcefully tell her the exact things her dad told her, but she refuses. Heidi's life just keeps getting worse. Real life is taking its toll on her, coupled with her wrong choices. That evening, Heidi goes clubbing and even ends up getting drunk. At the party, she notices a young man in a corner, and they stare at each other. The young man and his friend walk up to her in her drunk state, and they take her home. 3 of them settle down on the couch, and they hand her a portion of what they're smoking. With what she has smoked and drunk that night, Heidi is barely conscious, so the 2 boys take advantage of her. They kiss her from different angles and go ahead to undress her. One of them, John, starts to undress too, to get intimate with her. Even though his friend doesn't support what he wants to do, John still goes ahead to remove his clothes. Heidi stands up, saying that she wants to take her bath, but John tells her to relax and starts kissing her while his friend watches in amusement. After John removes Heidi's trousers, there's a knock at the door, and they are shocked. They feel it's her boyfriend, but still, even in that state, Heidi claims she doesn't have one. Then Joe comes in. They are shocked to see him, and start to panic. However, John begins to talk silly, like they should all just have their way with her. Even though Joe is just silent, John's friend notices John's silly talk and tries to shut him up. When John's attitude reaches its peak for Joe, he pushes him into the wall and punches him in the face till he starts to bleed. Joe finally stops hitting the boy, and he runs off with his friend. Joe, now alone with Heidi, gives her something to use to cover herself. Heidi breaks the silence by revealing that he hurt her feelings because he didn't call to check up on her. However, Joe doesn't think Heidi has any excuse for behaving promiscuously because that's not the best way to handle being hurt. Joe wonders why she behaved in such a way, and it's because she didn't want to be on her own. This amazes him, and he concludes that Heidi has problems and needs to seek help. This makes her a bit pissed, and she snaps back at him, because she isn't the only one that has problems. She feels Joe is too scared to even say he has problems, and share the problems with the people that he's supposed to be close to. Joe tells her bluntly that she's not close to people, but just has had sex with them, but she tells him she's close to him. Joe gets up and leaves the house. She follows him to his car and begs him to stay, but he drives off angrily, ignoring her. The next morning, Irene comes banging on Heidi's door. She is very angry at Heidi for what happened the night before, walking around in a drunken state, despite all her warnings and instructions she gave to her with the house. Heidi apologizes and says it was an accident, but this makes Irene angry, so she tells her to pack her things because she needs the room back. Perplexed, Heidi asks if her son is coming out of jail. This shocks Irene, who wonders how Heidi got to know, since she never mentioned it to her. However, she reveals that her son won't be coming back anytime soon, because he is convicted of murder, and then she walks away. This shocks Heidi, and she cries. Irene also weeps sorely. It is a memory that inflicts terrible pain on her. Later that night, Heidi goes to meet Irene and thanks her for everything she has done for her, then hands her the house key. She then uses this opportunity to confess the truth about her mom, who is not deceased as she claimed. In tears, Heidi explains everything to Irene, including what she did that made her run away from home, after her mom looked at her in disgust. Irene feels pity for Heidi and takes her into the house, suggesting that she calls her mother. Heidi feels ashamed and thinks her mom won't want to see her, but Irene encourages her and asks for the phone number. In the next scene, Heidi has packed all their things, and on coming back from a walk, she meets Joe outside the house. On getting into the house, Joe notices that her things are packed, and he's surprised when he learns that she's leaving. He sits by her side and then reaches out and holds her hand, which is something he usually found difficult to do before, but Heidi withdraws her hand and stands up. When Heidi's mom arrives at the house, she comes out with Joe. He tries to give her a goodbye kiss, but she pushes him back a little and just tells him that it's nice they met. On entering the car, she and her mom embrace each other. They have both missed each other. They drive off, and Heidi watches the icy scenery with the windows down. After a tough time and different experiences all alone, Heidi has finally learned the difference between love and sex.